Welcome to Spiritual Rockstar Podcast, where world-changing spiritual entrepreneurs come to deeply awaken the power within to bring forth their greatest purpose, to create massive awakened impact for millions of souls around the planet, while enjoying being in tune with all life and real wealth in all aspects of their lives. I'm your host, Daniel John Hanneman. Hello, everybody. I'm so glad to have you here with me. I have my beautiful friend, Amoda. Now you're gonna have to remind me how you pronounce your last name. Oh my God, I can't believe I should have asked you before we came on. Amoda, how do you pronounce your last name?
Well, Dan, you can just call me Amoda Maa.
Amoda Maa, right? That's what I was gonna say. I'm very sensitive to people's names. I'm like, I want to make sure I get it right. So Amoda Maa. And now she is an old friend. It's just we haven't talked in like 8 to 10 years, I think. Is that about it sounds about right, right?
That sounds about right.
She had come on my radio show when we were on Blog Talk, and for me anyway, I just felt like a huge, just such a wonderful connection with you. I don't know how to explain it. It was just a really good connection. I remember talking with Kavi is his name, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, yes, I remember. And I remember having conversations with him too. I don't know if he came on or not, but we talked, and I just thought, like, what a wonderful connection. So I'm really looking forward to sharing you today. And recently, what kind of prompted this interview is actually a long-term client of mine read one of your books. I'm not going to get into which one yet, but she read one of your books, and she reads tons of books. And she said it was literally the best for her, the best book she's ever read. She's ever read it. It's the best book ever. I said, who read? Oh, okay. I didn't even know who the author was. I said, who was the author? And she said your name. I'm like, it had been so long since we talked. I said, I think I know who that is. And I looked you up again. I'm like, yeah, that's the person I thought I was. Oh my God. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. That's the best book you ever read. He's amazing. So here we are. Okay.
Wonderful.
So let's inform the audience a little bit more about you. So Amoda Maa is a spiritual teacher sharing a fresh approach to the age-old search for spiritual freedom. Her essential teaching features a timeless truth that is highly relevant to this moment for contemporary seekers willing to go to the raw edge where spirituality meets humanity. That's really key. Since 2012, Amoda has been offering meetings and retreats to support and deepen the living of an awakened life. She has been a speaker or guest teacher at a variety of conferences, featured in several magazines, interviewed for numerous broadcasts and podcasts, and has written 4 books with translations into 5 languages. Her most recent books are Embodied Enlightenment, which that was the one I was talking about earlier, and the just about to be released, Falling Open in a World Falling Apart. Amazing. I just read it. It's incredible. Amoda lives with her beloved Kavi in New Mexico. Had no idea you were in New Mexico. You weren't when I talked to you last, and inspires a growing following worldwide. So it's so delightful to have you here.
Yes, thank you for that introduction. A lot has changed since we last spoke. When we last spoke 8 or 10 years ago, I was living in the countryside, a rural location in the United Kingdom, in England. And I actually was not teaching at the time. I'd just written my first book. And so I was kind of, in some ways, new to the speaking arena. I can't remember how we got in touch, but we did. And, a lot has changed since then. I've moved to the United States. Actually, this is my 5th book, the one that you mentioned last. I've been teaching and traveling, not at the moment, but I have been traveling. And much has matured, I suppose, through my work.
Wow. Yes. Oh my God. Well, I'm looking forward to getting into it. And tell us. I mean, I'm really curious. Like, can you tell us, like, in your books, you talk about, one of the things you talk about that I think is a really good entry point is you talk about, like so many people do that have really more deeply awoken, about the pain you experienced on your path and how you took a new approach to it. And I think like talking about your story about that can help people, because right now, obviously, there are, a lot of people. I mean, not everyone. I mean, not everybody's going through like, oh my God, it's the end of the world. But we are collectively feeling that sort of energy. And there are a lot of people really suffering right now, even more so. But you went through a lot of pain. I'll let you tell your own story. And it led into this deep awakening. And it's, I think that's what's so beautiful, is that for the world to see, like individually and collectively, the more we experience the sense of, oh wow, this is painful, or whatever the label is, but like we're experiencing this thing and it's so like traumatic, but that it is just calling us into awakening, like it did for you. And I'd just love for you to share about that with us, your experience with that.
That's often the most difficult. I don't really get asked this question very much anymore, and it's probably the most difficult question to answer, because that pain, that degree of suffering that I experienced initially through the circumstances of my life, mostly through my childhood and my young adulthood, and later on a more sort of nebulous but very poignant psychological suffering, that has been so long gone that it's very difficult for me to access it now and talk about it with any reality. I can only speak from my direct experience now. And although my teaching does talk about meeting pain, how to meet pain or how to meet difficulty, and of course the whole teaching is about that, when it comes to speaking about it personally, I have to so dig into my memory banks, which are remote. They're not in the direct experience of what's being lived. So I can try and do that, but you might hear me pause and stall a little bit. So let me see if I can drag something up that's useful to the listeners. The profound transformation that happened many years ago, we're talking about nearly 20 years ago, was what I came to realize after the event or after the fact, was a full awakening. Not an awakening in the way that the word is often used these days. It wasn't an awakening experience. It wasn't a glimpse of transcendence. All that had been perhaps experienced prior to that through my years of experimentation with psycho-spiritual techniques and meditation practices and going to India. Yeah, there's many different levels of awakening, but I don't call that awakening. What I'm talking about is the full realization of true nature, in which the psychological knot of separation dissolves. What led up to that was a very dark internal period in my psyche, in which life was experienced, or my inner experience was one of barrenness and desolation. I would call it the valley of death. And what I noticed was that the suffering was perpetuated by the avoidance of meeting the depth of that existential abyss. It was like a death, a psychological death. And we, as separate forms, as human forms, will do anything to avoid that psychological death. When it comes to physical death, if we're in physical danger, you know, we're being attacked or chased or about to be run over by a truck or whatever it might be, then the attempt to save ourselves on a physical level is absolutely natural. But when it comes to the psychological attempt to maintain me as an imagined separate self, because that's what it is, it's an identity that we've created for ourselves, that we believe ourselves to be a separate form, with lots of forms out there that are either dangerous, out to attack us, they're either the enemy, or they're friendly, and then we can move towards them and feel connected. So we live in this kind of divided psychic world. That identity of a separate self, the attempt to keep that intact is a great perpetuator of suffering. I'm not talking about circumstances, I'm talking about internal suffering. The sense of me that has to protect itself, save itself, uphold itself, put itself on a pedestal, get love, get this, you know, get that, you know, always looking for something in order to make itself feel safe, to make itself feel loved, to make itself feel special. Well, I noticed that any movement towards that in my mind, in my energy field, perpetuated the suffering. And somehow in seeing that, there was a deep letting go, or a deep surrender, or a deep relaxation. That surrender or relaxation was the willingness to psychologically die. Now, it felt at the time like I was going to die. Now, I knew it wasn't a physical death, but it gets all wrapped up in together. It's like the end of me. Mm-hmm. In that willingness to surrender to the existential abyss, the existential nothingness in which the me, the I, no longer exists, there was a relaxation, a softening, and an untangling of the ego self, because that's all the ego is the me that believes itself to be a separate entity and therefore will identify itself as the victim, or identify itself as the aggressor, or identify itself as something, anything, in order to maintain its sense of me. Well, all of that dissolved in a nanosecond. But the transformation was that I still exist, but I don't exist as a ego self that needs to uphold itself by accumulating identity from the world, either its inner world or its outer world. That's liberation. The end of that is liberation. Liberation of the true self from the false self. That was a profound transformation, because what I noticed after that was that the victim was no longer there. The victim identity. And the victim identity, in my experience, was always the one who felt unloved, or felt unseen, or felt like it didn't have enough anything, enough love, enough security, enough money, enough, it was always looking for something, and that looking was always a dream of the future, like an imagined future, and so that's a lack of presence as well. So what this did, it dissolved the victim self, and it brought me right into presence. And from that moment on, there's been a living as presence. That victim self is also the victim self that is a victim of its own feelings. So that was a profound shift. So like very often, and I experience this when I I work with people, yeah. I work with people one-to-one, and I work with people in groups, is that one of the primary places where we are a victim, even though we don't think of ourselves as a victim, but there is a victim identity, is when we feel feelings or emotions that we don't like, that we think are bad, like sadness could be one, or anger, or despair, or grief, or whatever it is, or fear even. And we feel, yeah, these feelings, these energies. There's a subtle feeling underneath that, or an identification underneath that, that says, I'm a bad person. There's something wrong with me. I'm not spiritual enough. I'm not strong enough. I'm not enlightened enough. I'm not skilled enough. I'm not perfect enough. I'm not worthy enough. So we create an identity based around the victim that depends on how we feel. Because then when we feel good, we have happy feelings or peaceful feelings or joyful feelings. Then what's the problem? It's great. I'm lucky. I'm good. I'm worthy. I'm blessed. I'm abundant. Yeah. So we have a split. We're divided within. Freedom, liberation, the end of the tight knot of ego self is the end of that, because we're not identified with our feelings. Therefore, we're not a victim of our feelings. So for me, that was a profound, that's how I kind of recognized after the dissolvement of that me identity, after that, for a period of months and maybe a year, that's how I noticed that something profound had shifted. And there was a liberation, a freedom from ego self in that, because all those kind of psychological structures just fell apart. They collapsed. So I mean, that was my experience.
Yeah.
So it's from that place that I could then speak to people about how we can meet challenge, how we can meet pain, how we can meet difficult emotions, and so on and so on.
Right. So on. I like that. So great. That's so wonderful. So wonderful. Yeah, I mean, part of me just wants to shut up and just sit in the silence with you. Isn't that a lovely thing, right? So we could, it might be even more powerful for the audience, right? So we invite you all to just soak in the silence as we speak, right?
Well, the silence is more powerful than words very often. I always say that. It's like, you know, when I speak, you know, it's like, listen to the space between the words. Mm-hmm. Don't grasp the words with the mind, because very often the words are contradictory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So I'm just sitting here with you. Yeah, you know, I mean, you probably hear this from other people, but it's like, I think a lot of the, I mean, I don't know, but I'm thinking a lot of our listeners have heard many of the things you're saying to be right. I mean, it's like, okay, we've heard the enlightenment story before, the full awaken, or whatever, you know, whatever the label is that we use to talk about it. And then people think about Eckhart Tolle because he's the big headlines, right? And he's doing, you know, he really is. He's done so much good. And then we have then I think about my teacher, one of my teachers, one of my supports in my life, my journey, Ajay Shanti, which you've probably heard of. And, you know, I feel like, okay, yeah, heard these things before, right? So that's the first thing that comes to my mind. And that's why I kind of like, just this silence wants to come into me. I don't want to like almost interview you. I'm just like, let's stay in the silence then. There's nothing to talk about. It's all just concepts. We're just talking about the concept. Because really, I mean, I will say this, and then I think it'll move the conversation along then from there. But it's, you know, I have not experienced what I would call a full psychological death. I have not. And so I still have my stuff, you know, I still have the stuff I deal with. But it's like I have had what you've described in terms of periods of time of that surrender or whatever, whatever, again, measure, oh, well, how deep was it? And well, who cares? I mean, I've experienced that liberation in different levels and ways. Like recently I had a struggle with something and like, it's just like such a sense of struggle. It was just like, okay, I totally surrender. That's it, and it was like, this really, that peace comes into you, and you just like, well, it doesn't really matter, like you get more into that space anyway. Like when you're not in a full psychological death, of course, it's not complete, but it's like, it just, okay, whatever's unfolding, it just is, So I'm just in that space. And then what I find for myself is, and I've been in a much deeper space of that even in the past, experience of a deeper place than that. And then what happens is that things, if you have a full psychological death, you're, like you said, the mind says, because you did experience that sense of surrender, your life conditions do tend to improve, right? So it's like, wow, whoa, breakthroughs, things are great now, right? Wow, good. All right, it's time to eat. Let's just go, and you're just like, good, we got it. And then there's some aspect to that, right? And then, but then what happens in that cycle, like you said, like we've heard so many times, but it's worth repeating. It's like you will dip then back into I'm lacking again once what you perceive to be working now isn't seeming to work the way you want it to your satisfaction, right? So it's like, oh, we're here again. I got to figure this out. I got to learn. I got to figure it out. I got to figure it out. I got to tune in. I got to ask my guides. I got to ask source. And then this is something that we keep doing. And, so it's like everybody is where they are. So I guess, Amoda, what I'm saying is people are probably a little bit, on average, closer to where I am than where you are as far as the full psychological death sort of thing. But so I'm trying to, what I always appreciate about with Adye, for example, is he always is helping to orient us to whatever, to the depth or whatever you want to call it. But anyway, so how can you orient somebody right now who may be experiencing levels of awakening, but continue to devolve back? I see that a lot with people like myself. So we devolve back, some people deeper than others. Everything's horrible. I wish I was dead, of course, right? Of course they wish they were dead, right? I mean, and so many of the people that are listening right now, that's been their constant wish in their life. They want to die. They literally just don't want to be on the planet. And we know that that's the spiritual response to the psychological death they desire, right? So that's what they really want. But they keep thinking like, well, this life's just too hard, so I need to get out of here, and then that'll make it better. So how can we deal with, like, especially now with turbulence and challenge, how can we deal with that? So we have something to talk about. Otherwise, I'd say, like, let's just be in the silence. But like, how do we deal with this psychological stuff when we're experiencing some of that deep awakening? But it keeps like, man, we just can't get out of this game, Like.
Okay, so thank you. First of all, let's in some ways we could take the conversation out of the realm of enlightenment. I mostly these days, my teaching has, it's always evolving. That's why I said don't listen to the words, but listen to the space within which the words are appearing. So, because the words keep changing. And I haven't stopped speaking of awakening or enlightenment or embodied enlightenment, which is what I prefer to talk about. But I tend to talk more about openness, meeting life, meeting our experience as openness. And this has evolved over time because I'm not interested in enlightenment per se. I was never looking for that myself. That's why it took me a year or two after the event, after the fact, to realize or to recognize that actually that's what had in some ways taken place. So I'm not trying to take people to a place of enlightenment. I'm not trying to say, well, here is the goal, here is the pedestal that you need to achieve. That's not helpful. In fact, my whole work over the past few years in speaking with people is to disband the many myths around enlightenment.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where it started. Looking at the Holy Grail and looking at this idea of enlightenment as a perfect place where we don't experience pain. So the conversation really started there.
Mm-hmm.
And that started really when I moved to the United States a few years ago, because there were so many spiritual seekers I was coming across, or that were coming to my events, including Adyashanti's students, because I was in the Bay Area. So these were serious, experienced spiritual seekers.
Yeah.
And I found that the question was always much the same. It's like, well, I've had these spiritual experiences. I've been with my spiritual teacher for so many years. I understand it. I get it, and so on. And I've had this, you know, I've had certain experiences and realizations, but still I'm struggling with my life. And so the conversation really started from there. And from that point, and traveling around the US to many different spiritual communities and centers, the conversation has evolved. And what it's evolved to is speaking, dialoguing, inquiring, having conversations, not intellectual conversations, but conversations where we really meet each other in truth, listening to each other, about openness. Because ultimately that's what enlightenment is. But if we take it out of this idea of enlightenment as a special, super elevated, perfect place, openness is something that every single human being knows in their deepest. In the depths of each of us, our essential nature is open. It cannot be anything else. So this ego dissolvement that I described as my experience was really the falling into openness, or falling open as unconditioned awareness. Now we can put a load of fancy words around it, and that just creates more ideas as to what it is, but we have to use some words, otherwise,
right,
like you say, we'll sit here in silence, which is also beautiful, and we do that as well. But we have to point to something. But when we point to openness, the conversation really goes to a deeper place, and it's relevant to every single human being, and especially in the current climate, you know, the current times that we live in. And so we could have a whole conversation about this, and I'm sure we will. That's what my new book is about. But I'll start off by saying that the first place of confusion comes because most people think that openness means that we have no boundaries. Well, if I'm open, because everyone knows what it feels like to shut down, to close down, to kind of, reject an experience, to put our head in the sands, or to just kind of get numb to protect ourselves. And they know what openness feels like, which is a kind of relaxed state. It's a flow state. It's a surrender, and so on and so on. We feel connected. We feel complete. We feel okay. We feel at peace. And then the question comes, well, I can open when I feel safe. But surely it's safe, or I have to, or how do I protect myself from something that's dangerous? Then I have to close. So that's the first kind of, if you like, not stumbling block, but kind of place that we can untangle what openness really is, because it's not to do with boundaries. Yeah, each of us has the authority, and should have the authority, to say yes and to say no according to right action. Yeah, there's a time to say yes, and there's a time to say no. But that yes and no can come from a place of openness, not from a place of tight ego self. So if I may just open that up a little bit, what I mean by openness is when we do not wrap a narrative around our experience. We simply meet the experience as it is. And then from that place, there's a deeper intelligence that guides us. It's very natural to either take action or not take action, to either say yes or to say no. Yeah? So, but when we wrap a narrative around an experience, and that narrative is, this shouldn't be happening. It's not, yeah, I shouldn't be feeling this. And so on and so on. All the narratives that the ego self wraps around its experience. I'm a bad person, or I'm not spiritual enough because my life's not going according to the way that I want it to go. I'm still experiencing pain, or this challenge, or so on and so on. When we wrap a narrative around our experience, we're living from the surface. Yeah, we're living from surface mind, and surface mind is conditioned. Yeah? It's the matrix. We're slaves. There's no freedom in that. There's no truth in that. There's no love in that. So what I'm speaking to here is the openness that is beneath that. It doesn't wrap a narrative. It just meets what's here. And when you meet what is here, whether it's good, bad, ugly, whether it's painful, whether it breaks your heart, whether it takes you into desolation, or whether it's super inspiring and super elevating, whatever it is, you just meet it. And in that meeting, you are invincible. Yeah, because nothing can touch openness. Nothing can harm openness. Opinion, belief, conditioned mind can be attacked, can be disagreed with, can be argued with, and so on. And that's where the battle is. And that's the battle we see in the world, and that's the battle we have in our lives. So if we want true freedom and true love and true peace and true authority and true intelligence, then the invitation is to meet life from a much deeper place. Yeah? And that deeper place takes us into our true nature as openness. Now, the whole of the rest of the conversation, as it's offered through my teaching, what I offer is the mirror, the reflection through inquiry as to where we give our allegiance. So if I'm speaking with somebody, I would reflect and have an inquiry session where they would start to see, he, she would start to see what they're giving allegiance to. Are they giving allegiance to surface conditioned mind, which is the knee-jerk reaction, the fallback, the default position, and that's where the suffering is? Or are they willing to turn allegiance to something more true, more present, that is always here, that is the aliveness at the core of this moment, right here, right now? This isn't a spiritual cover-up. Yeah, it's not a palliative. It's not a meditation technique where you just feel good for a certain amount of time. This is a transformation of ego self. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's an ongoing journey. It's an ongoing journey, and only by seeing what stands in the way of that openness can we start to relax into that.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Amoda, one of the things I wanted to ask you is, there's so many things I want to ask you. I'm like, we should have booked 2 or 3 hours for this show. This would be amazing. So, but what some of the questions that are coming up for me to ask, there's a lot of information people keep taking in, right? On social media, YouTube, COVID's going to get you, no COVID's a conspiracy theory, or, like the Chinese are going to get you, Black Lives Matter, you better, get really angry and start, protesting really violently, maybe even. I don't know, like there's so many concepts. It's like a war, So a warlike state going on that we plug into, most of us, every single day into social media. And I think that's where, when you talk about, I don't know, psychological suffering, if you want to call it that or whatever, but like all this psychological suffering that's going on is going on. And then I want to just swipe that screen to the side for a second and say, now, some of those people would say, okay, I hear you, Amoda. Like, yeah, I get that. But these are real issues. These are real problems. These are real issues. And being the way you are is actually a spiritual bypass. So say something like that. Like that would be maybe their perspective on you. Like, she's just all spiritual bypassed, she's too passive. We're all gonna die based on her perspective, like physically, or we're gonna be controlled, the Illuminati's gonna get us, etc. So you can say we're fine and everything, you bypass yourself into a deeper matrix because they're gonna control you and take you over. So you've got, this concept going on, and we don't know if it's true or not, but it's a concept, right? So what do you say to people? Because a lot of people are wrapped up in whatever the concept is. That's just one of them, right? So many. Who can ever get to them all? There's so many, but like that would be a concept. But how about someone says, okay, we're going to psychologically die, I'm going to let go. I know it. I'm playing the role here so we can point into something for people. But like, okay, we'll do this thing. We're going to open. We're just going to let it all be. But they think it's way too passive. That's when I'm teaching about what you're teaching about my way. People say it's just way too passive sometimes. That's their objection at first. It's a resistance. Like, oh, it's too passive. So what do you say to people that say it's too passive? We got real issues going on.
I understand. I've been, I don't know if been accused of that is a little bit too strong, but it is a question that comes up.
Yeah.
It's certainly a question that's directed at spiritual teachers. Well, if freedom or liberation or peace or whatever is a state of surrender, then surely that's passive, and then all the issues that you speak about. That view is a complete misunderstanding. There is such a thing as spiritual bypassing, for sure. And there are some teachers even, and some individuals who are prone to spiritual bypass. That's not what I'm speaking of here. And that's certainly not my experience. That's why I wrote a book called Embodied Enlightenment, because embodied enlightenment is the opposite of spiritual bypassing. It's feeling your human experience and responding to that, but responding to that not from the drama of ego, but from the depth of being, which is intelligent. Yeah, it's not the matrix, it's the unraveling of the matrix, so that you can move from inner silence. There's no intelligent right action, there's no love in action unless we move from inner silence. Inner silence does not mean that you are passive. There may be times where stillness is required. It's the most intelligent thing to flap around like a chicken with its head cut off after every drama, after every bit of news, after every scaremongering, after every problem in the world. And there have been problems in the world since the beginning of time. No, it's just escalated now. It's escalated because we're all on social media, so we hear about it. It's escalated because there's more people in the world. It's escalated because, yes, there are some dark forces in the world. So there are issues that you speak of that are probably very real. Yeah, I say probably because I haven't got all the facts to hand, but I'm very aware of what's happening in the world. Yeah, but what I'm speaking about is moving not from flapping around, not from opinion, not from taking sides, not from aggression, but from true intelligence. And that intelligence comes when we deepen beyond our narratives. Yeah, our narrative is what creates the division in the world. We have to be still. We have to be silent. We have to be open to meeting what is here in our direct experience. And the news is not our direct experience. Yeah? Our direct experience is what is right here in front of us and is felt as, not as a thought, not as a projection, because all of that is mostly a bunch of lies. Yeah, it's manipulated, it's corrupted.
Right.
Yeah, we have to come into what is here in our direct experience and move from that and take action from that and stand up as love from that. And then there will be time to take action. In the same way that Arjuna went into the holy battle, yeah, even after enlightenment, he went into battle, he entered the world. So it's not an avoidance of the world, it's not a bypassing of the world, but we have to recognize and know our true nature before we can take right action. Otherwise, we're just a bunch of what I call chickens with their heads cut off, just flapping around.
Right.
And the world's operated in that paradigm. It's a paradigm of fear. The true warrior doesn't react from fear.
Mm-hmm.
He's seen through the illusion of fear. He's recognized his eternal, unbounded, invincible nature. And from that place, he can cut off the enemy's head or not. Yeah, there's wise action. So this is a tough call for each of us, but it's not inaccessible. Yeah, we need to come to understand what it means in our individual lives. And it starts not just with the world and what's happening on a global level or a, COVID level, but it includes that. But we start with our immediate lives, in our relationships, mostly in our intimate relationships. Most people are reactive. Yeah. In our relationship to our work, in our relationship to every single aspect of our daily lives, we start right there, and then it radiates out into how we are with other people, into how we are with other nations, into how we are with the world. Okay? And of course, there's some things we can't control. The world will play itself out. Yeah. Whether we feel righteous about it or not. So it's not passive, it's not bypassing, but it is standing as a warrior, waiting, being silent. And then when the right time comes, yeah, the right action.
Right.
Then there's power. But first we need to watch it fall apart. Yeah, the structures, psychological internal structures or external structures in the world, it's all the same. They're all ego structures. We need to watch them, yeah, start to crumble. We need to watch them rise to the surface with all the horror. And before we act impulsively, just wait. Watch it burn. Watch it burn. Stand as openness. Stand as presence. Stand as silence. Don't be reactive, because reactivity is conditioned. Yeah? And we're slaves to that conditioning. Don't be a slave and wait. When the right time comes, there'll be an intelligent impulse to take action. That has nothing to do with opinion or belief or taking sides or, being aggressive. It's something much more powerful than that. I don't know exactly what it looks like for each individual. Each individual needs to find that. But certainly there's no spiritual bypassing here. It's not a transcendence in that sense, but it is a transcendence of our conditioned narratives.
That's beautiful, Amoda. I mean, I really appreciate your response. That was really well put. Really articulated well. And I'm so glad we talked about it, because I think that's like what comes up for people. This is too passive, but the truth is, my experience of seeing, myself and others who get into this deep presence and are in deep presence, you're just, you're just 1,000 times more effective, or whatever. I don't know how to put it. I mean, even for the mind, it's like, why would we want to do this? You're just 1,000 times more effective. I don't know how else to put it, but you just have a much more effective way of moving in the world. Because how can you be effective when every time a new news feed comes and you're reacting? Oh, wait a minute, what about that one? It's just.
The nervous system gets very you know, tight. The nervous system gets very, you know, kind of hyper reactive and hyperactive when we're constantly reacting in fear. We're giving our allegiance to fear. That fear is only in the mind. Yeah, that fear is an imagined fear. It's an imagined outcome. We can meet fear in a totally different way. We can meet the world in a totally different way to that overreactivity. So the nervous system can de-traumatize itself. When we're reacting from trauma, then we're victims. We're just children having a tantrum. Yeah. So when the nervous system is relaxed, then there's power in that. There's new insight, there's inspiration, and there's much more effective action. Yeah. You know, right. Just going back to perhaps some of my story, which I didn't go into in great detail, but the transformation that happened for me, no, life was not perfect after that. It was the end of looking for perfection. It wasn't like my life suddenly became successful or whatever that means, or, you know, it wasn't to do with that. There was a deep okayness with everything. There was a deep nourishment in that. So suffering ended, but that didn't mean that there weren't certain challenges in life, because the trajectory of your life continues. Whatever you put into motion or didn't put into motion in your life, it still continues. Mm-hmm. You know, so there were many challenges on a worldly level, many difficulties on a worldly level that still continued and had to be met. Not all of them in the same way, but karma still unfolds itself. What changed is how I met that, and how I met that had no suffering in it. So everything was met as a I'm not going to use the word gift, because that gets really, it's not like, oh, it was all a gift. It was just a beautiful, even in its agony, what I call an exquisite agony of meeting life exactly as it is. It's like having your heart broken open over and over again, but that broken open isn't one of poor me. Mm. It's just this exquisite unfoldment of life, however it is. At the same time, it's all scenery. Yeah, it's all a dream, really. Now that's not spiritual bypassing. Yeah, it's all a dream, therefore I'm not going to bother doing anything or caring about. It's not bypassing. But the realization is that awareness is the only fact. Everything else keeps on changing. It's like a scene, a movie that unfolds right from birth to death. Yeah? Before birth, there was no world. After death, there is no world. So what's real? Yeah? And yet, between birth and death, there's this exquisite unfoldment where nothing is avoided, and nothing is denied, and nothing is bypassed. Everything touches us right to the core. But at the same time, the paradox is that it's not the ultimate reality. The ultimate reality is awareness, because that doesn't change.
Right.
So when we can live in that paradox, then we start to become masters of life. Yeah? We start to develop what I call spiritual resilience. The capacity to be present and open every step of the way, through the turbulence, through the everything, whatever that turbulence is, through the world falling apart, you know, through our internal world falling apart, through our external world falling apart. And out of that, yeah, right action reveals itself.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, Amoda, this is great. really enjoying just taking it all in, just taking everything in. Just you just invite a space of that of the openness. You invite that space. So I really appreciate that. So I'm a little less talkative than normal. I let myself soak in that openness. And yeah, I mean, the last thing maybe we'll just touch on real quick as we start to wrap up is, yeah, I mean, I've experienced for myself, I have experienced very momentary in terms of like a sense of like soul, like a sense of soul liberated, matter of days or weeks or whatever you want to call it, but literally like nothing, everything was experienced as not, it was even beyond what you're saying, like in terms of my experience, okay? And it was temporary, but it was a sense of everything is delightful. Everything's delightful. Anything could be happening. It's just like, it's not that you don't have any compassion or any love. It's all there, but it's everything's love, I guess. I don't know how to explain it. It just is. And you're just loving what is, period. You're literally in that total connection. And for me, I just didn't, it just wasn't, I'm just not done yet. It's like the ding, you're done sort of thing, whenever it happened. Then when you're in the process of awakening, you want to, your old trick, the old trick of the ego is, can we control it? Can we make it happen? Can we attain enlightenment? Can we?
Yes.
So even though I kind of knew that was a mistake, part of me still wanted to do it because it just has that energy to want to try to do that anyway. And then at some point, I just let go of that. Now I just live, and yes, I'm not fully, I wouldn't say I've had that full psychological death, but I'm at peace with wherever I am in another sense. You know what I mean? Like, even if I'm going through psychological suffering, I'm like, it's okay. It's all right. I mean, whatever it's all okay. It's fine. I know my process just continues to unfold, and it's okay. And I'm not trying to, I'm not so much trying to seek it at all. It's just, okay, well, if there's a thing called full openness or whatever the label is, if that's available to me, if that wants to happen, it'll happen. I don't have to concern myself with it. I just maintain in the stillness and the openness and, practice the present, so to speak, right? I mean, that's how I look at it.
Yes. I think you touched on it right there, where you said it's the end of seeking. Yeah, there's no more seeking.
Right.
When we stop seeking enlightenment, when we stop seeking some perfect state of happiness, when we stop seeking that experience that we had, which some spiritual high, we gradually come to a deep acceptance of what is. And paradoxically, that is the awakening. The awakening doesn't have to be just this one moment where it goes bang, right, or this major realization or this full dissolvement of the ego self. It can be very gradual. It's like an erosion of the ego that happens, yes, over time. And I'd say for most people, it's that way. It's just that they don't believe it can be that way, and it hasn't got all the fireworks with it. It hasn't got all the glamour with it. Right. And it just happens. Yeah. And actually, it's a much more graceful way. Yeah. And so my invitation, that's why my invitation is really not to enlightenment, but or my conversation's not about enlightenment, but to this openness that is always available here and here. This openness, call it relaxation, call it just being okay with what is. It's not passive, it's not, it's not bypassing, it's just fully feeling the glory and the horror of what is here, what is here, what is here, over and over again. Without seeking to avoid it, without seeking to reject it, without seeking to create an identity for yourself out of it. It's just happening. It doesn't mean you're good or you're bad. It doesn't mean you're punished or blessed. That's life. It's life. It has ups and downs. It has turbulence, and it has peaceful times and moments. It includes everything. It includes everything. The whole scenery, the whole scene of the human experience is included in it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the things that I didn't understand in the past. I was like, because I think the idea always of like the perfect world, fully awake, I'm fully awake. It's like some static state that like, okay, just freeze dry it. You know, someone said that one time. And I'm like, that makes so much sense. That's what people keep thinking. Like, we're just going to freeze dry it. We're just awake and that's it. And like, it's not like that. It's a very dynamic state. It's not some, I think people say, oh, enlightenment sounds too boring, or openness sounds too boring, or whatever you want to call it. Well, it's too boring. It's like, I find it's just the opposite. It's more delightful. The more you're in the depth of it, the more pleasure there is, the more fulfilling and, I don't know, like exciting is the word, but it's more fulfilling and fun and joyful. And that's been my experience.
There's more aliveness. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
more alive.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, so where can people learn more about you?
Go to my website. Yeah, www.Amoda Maa, that's M-A-A, yeah, amodamaa.com. Go to my website. I do a lot of writing, so I post new bits of writing all the time, either on my website or on Facebook. I have a public page, Amoda Maa. I do a lot of things on there, so then you can kind of get into what I'm saying and different aspects of it. And there's also events. I do a lot of events at the moment, online events that are listed on my website. And you can also get a list of my books on my website.
And they're very good. I mean, I've read, well, I didn't fully read the two, but the Embodied Enlightenment and your new one. What's the title again? I might butcher it otherwise.
Falling, oh, you've got me forgetting it. Falling open in a world falling apart, which, strangely, I actually, that title came to me quite a long time before this whole COVID thing started.
Yeah.
And what I was really referring to was falling open in a world falling apart. I was referring to two things. One is that our internal world falls apart, and that's those psychological structures I speak of. So how can we fall open in the midst of that? And also the world. I mean, the world in some ways is always falling apart, in the sense that nothing is certain. The mind likes to think of certainty and safety and so on, but that's like from the microscopic view or the myopic view of an individual life. When you look at it over a much wider perspective, there really is no certainty in life. There really is no, we don't know what's unfolding and how it's unfolding and all of this. So in some ways, everything's always changing. It's always falling apart. Yeah. So really, I'm referring to like, how can we meet life how can we meet life as the unknown, from the unknown, which is the same as openness, without the mind that comes to its conclusion about things. I know, or I know how it's going to be, or I know what I want, or I know how to act. The mind always thinks it knows,
right,
and therefore can never be present. When we meet life from the unknown, or as the unknown, or in the unknown, that's really the same as meeting life as presence. We can be very present with what is. So that's really what that title kind of referred to. And then a few months later, or 6 months later, this whole thing just went bang. And so it was very relevant to that.
Yeah, and one of the things I want to offer to people listening to is another orientation that probably has been said lots of times, but again, is this whole thing about being, again, I'll use the old words that you're not using so much, but like awakened or enlightened or whatever. Like, it's so true. Again, I heard the words earlier on, and then I started to understand it more. It's like, it's actually the most natural thing, and yet we think it's a supernatural state. Like, oh, it's some beyond state to get to enlightenment, and it's like the most natural state of being. You're already experiencing levels of it. throughout your entire day. It's always there.
Mhm.
So it's always there, and people just don't understand how just normal it is often. And I think that's one of the there's so many misunderstandings. I wish we could do a few shows just on all the misunderstandings around this, right? I mean, that
Yes.
would be juicy. So
Yes, I actually did a course at the beginning of the year. I did a 5-week online course, which was exactly about that, looking at the myths of enlightenment and unraveling that. And that was very helpful, I think, for many people, because yes, it is a natural state. It's the unraveling, or the dissolvement, or the cleansing, if you like, of the conditioned narratives we have.
Mhm.
So that's what I mean by the difference between living from the surface mind or living from the deep. The deep, or the innermost, is what that is the one, if you like, that knows true nature. Yeah, and true nature is innocent, is whole. It's not divided. Yeah, and that's what we're born as. Yeah, and hopefully that's what we'll die as. But in between that birth and death, it gets completely covered up by all the identities that we pick up for ourselves or create for ourselves, and all the narratives and so on.
Yes, yes, and so it is. Yes. So, Moda, um, absolutely just grateful for our time together. And well, I'll offer it to you. I mean, I think that we talked about it through the process of setting up the interview. Can I offer you a minute or two of just tuning into your awesome open self and just sharing some beautiful things about yourself?
Sure.
Okay.
Why not?
I know. Okay. So yeah, so I think this would be very fascinating for our viewers as well, and listeners, because wow, this is someone that is let go of a lot. So what is it like inside someone's energy a little bit that's in that state? And so what I can say, what I sense about it anyway, is just a sense of like just a clear energy. And I've experienced this only a few times. I've done thousands of energy scans. I only here and there, every once in a while, very, very rarely do I experience somebody with such open energies. And the energy, just like when we say, oh, near the crown, and it's just like it's just peace. It's just flow. I could dig deeper. I've got really deep look in there, right? But mostly it's that, like the old vessels of perfectionism and all that stuff. I can feel it still. It's still somewhere, right? But it's not activated in like controlling your life and all that stuff anymore. So that's part of the perspective of like, where the place it goes to it. It's there. It might try to dig in a little bit every once in a while subtly, but it's subtle now, so it's different. And so I noticed that. And let's see, I always go from the top, so let's maybe go down to the root chakra. The root chakra, just a real practical, your very pragmatic self is there. I see a lot of creativity within it still, but it's like we don't need to be, because you're not in fantasy anymore. So it's not like, well, let's do that now. Well, you don't, like, it's simplified. It's what I love about it. It's simplified. It's just like, okay, next step, whatever. Like it's just next step, next step. It's very pragmatic. It's just in the moment, just pragmatic. And so the planning process that people, a lot of us do, is not. It's very light. It feels very light. It's a very light planning process, and like you see, so many people, talk about that are in this sort of state you're in, and so I see that, and I just, I go to your heart chakra maybe. I just see that precious, heart that is willing to be vulnerable, like you described. I mean, that you have that, and you're inviting it in. But you do have, like, it shows up, but like you're just like, you do have a stop signal in there. You're like, stop. And so it's a signal that's going on that keeps you from maybe getting swept away in an energy. So it's there, and it's clear and firm, and I really like that. I would say one area that might want to continue to flourish and open more is the throat chakra. And there does feel like more that wants to come out and be shared from your depth. Like it showed up in the interview too, like a really like boom, like some more, more of the fullness of your voice. So I just described it that for today, but but anyway, I just wanted to share a few things with you, and I thought it'd be interesting to the audience too. And
Thank you.
it's lovely to share with you. So.
Thank you. Okay, good. Well, yes.
So anyway, and then I'd just like to share with people from there is if people want to check me out, you can go to yoursacredpurpose.com. I've got a meditate and make money meditation, which is a nice relaxed way to let the flow of energy of insights and awakening and awareness to flow through. That does translate into money abundance, and people that are using it consistently actually do see the results. So go check that out. It's for free. And you can also get some scanning with me if you want. There's an opportunity there for that. And so you can go to yoursacredpurpose.com for that. And Amoda, before we leave, why don't you go ahead and share again your website so we make sure they remember that too.
Okay, so it's www.amodamaa.com. I'll spell Amoda Maa. AMODAMAA. Yeah, that's it, .com.
There we go. Yeah. Well, if they're feeling like me, they just want to give me more, give me more. I want more. So, okay. So take advantage of that, everybody. And like I always say at the end of these shows, keep on tuning in and we'll keep on rocking it here on Spiritual Rockstar Podcast Show. Okay. Much love, everyone. Until next time.
Right. Thank you.
You're listening to Spiritual Rockstar Podcast. Stay tuned for our next upcoming new episodes each Wednesday and Saturday. Please be sure to subscribe, rate, and review to help us to serve you best. As a reminder, you can get your free Meditate and Make Money meditation at www.yoursacredpurpose.com to rock your sacred purpose. Goodbye for now, everybody.